All right, COVID-19 quarantine or lockdown. We're not supposed to leave the house. We're supposed to leave the bikes parked in the garage or in the shed, wherever you keep them. What can we be doing to take care of our bikes during this time? I'll give you a list of 10 quick things that I think are important. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. So I've got two different kinds of bikes that I think will cover a lot of people out there. I've got a modern bike, my 2012 fuel-injected V-Strom, and I've got a vintage bike, my Cafe Racer, the 1978 Suzuki GS550. So between these two, there's some different things I need to do. In no real particular order, here are 10 things I think we can be doing with this time to really take care of these precious objects that we enjoy so much. And I'm going to save the most important one for the end. Number one, adjust throttle play. This is one of those easy things to do. And really goes a long way to improving your riding experience. Nice. Number two, lubricate cables. It's one of those jobs we put off and put off and put off. Cable lubrication is so important and gets overlooked so often that I did a video on it. I'll put a link right here. Number three, brake inspection. I just put some pads and a new rotor, new disc on my V-Strom, so I know I'm good back here, but let's check it all. Here in the front, things are looking a little thinner. I can see the inside pad on that side and on the other side. Don't assume because you can see the inside pads that the outside ones are wearing similarly. In my case they are, but if you get a bind on that guide pin and one pad is stuck, then they can wear unevenly. And it's sometimes difficult to notice that as you're riding. On a vintage bike, you can adjust the rear brake pedal play and adjust the play in the rear brake through this adjustment down here. Next is clean your chain. I do this, every 600 miles or so. But then again, I often think of it sooner than that. I'm using kerosene. One of these brushes is inexpensive and very much worth the tiny investment. When you're done cleaning it, you can wipe this off and adjust your chain. I don't currently own one, but those of you with a shaft drive bike can change your final drive gear oil. Number five is to inspect a lot of bearings. Wheel bearings, swing arm bearings, and steering head bearings. Wheel bearings, I just had this wheel off because I did the rear disc. And so I could check the bearings when I had the cush drive apart and could get my fingers in there with the axle out. But on the bike, if you just grab the wheel when it's up on a paddock stand and just shake it from top and bottom, laterally like this. If you feel any slop in that whatsoever, better order up some bearings. Swing arm bearing is a little more challenging. On a paddock stand like this, I'll grab the entire frame of the bike, not grabbing the swing arm itself, and I will push sideways like this, and I'm trying to feel for any kind of slop up in that bearing that runs through. You know, there's two bearings, and there's a pivot point right here. And I'm going side to side. If I feel anything there, I gotta address that. On my vintage bike, I just put this thing together. Those bearings are brand new in there. I have a video on that I'll put here if you're interested. And I have less than 40 miles on these bearings right now, so no need to inspect those. Front wheel bearings, probably best to remove the axle and inspect them by hand, but I can just sandwich the wheel between my legs and grab the two down tubes or the lower fork lowers and just shake that around. If I feel any play in there at all, I don't, I got a bearing problem. To check the steering head bearings, it's a little difficult with this bike because of the fairing, but it can be done. I stand over the front wheel. These hand guards don't help either. I apply the front brake and grab the handlebars, and I'm just pulling up like this. And if I feel any play in that steering head, nothing. I'm feeling it in the suspension there, but nothing in the steering head. A lot easier with the little bike. Apply the front brake with my thumb. If you like motorcycles, custom builds, or just like a good story about a man's 3-year effort to build a tribute to his childhood teacher, get a copy of Creating Mr. Corton. In it, you'll learn how this man changed this man for the better. How this man took this and built this. How these guys became lifelong friends and enthusiasts of motorcycling and craftsmanship. And how the name Urban Monk originated. It's available from Amazon anywhere in the world that Amazon ships, in both paperback and ebook, or you can purchase through a link found on urbanmonktv.com. Get your copy of Creating Mr. Corton today. Next is to inspect tires. Obviously this one doesn't have very many miles on it, so as far as tread wear goes, I'm good to go here. Also good here on my V-Strom. Still round here. I've certainly got more miles here, but starting to flatten out a little bit, but not too bad. This is the front on my GS 550, the vintage bike. Again, not too many miles. Over here, I've got about 20,000 miles on this front Shinko 705, and you may notice toward the middle of the tread that I'm having a little bit of cupping here. You can feel, I don't know if the camera is picking up kind of how that's rounded. When I'm riding, I feel it because these tires start out feeling smooth like a street bike, but when you start getting up over 20,000 miles like this, they do start to cup and they start feeling a little bit like a knobby, and they also get louder. So I am looking to replace this one pretty soon. I'm going to still push it a little bit further, but these are the kinds of things you want to inspect. What I'm really concerned with, of course, is when I'm in a turn, am I smooth and round over here? And I am. And so that's where I have more of my concern, is when I'm leaning than when I'm riding upright and straight. But it does get a little noisy. And of course, tire inspection also includes checking tire pressure. a little low. All right. Your tire pressure can be found either in your service manual or it'll be found on a sticker on the bike. Here I'm at 36 cold for the front, 41 cold for the rear on my V-Strom. On older bikes, they'll put it on the steering head of the frame on a sticker sometimes. Again, a little shy. And you may ask yourself, where do those air molecules go to? Einstein proved that air molecules in tires slowly over time disappear infinitely far away from the tire into a black hole at the center of galaxies that are billions of miles away. Look it up. Number 7 is to adjust your clutch. Since I built this bike recently, all of these things have been done. But in the case of my V-Strom and many modern bikes, you have a hydraulic clutch. And there isn't a whole lot to adjust here, other than your lever position. But on a modern bike like this, once your lever position is set, it's not something you're probably going to change unless you're a new owner to it. The other place you can be adjusting on vintage bikes is, of course, down here on the clutch side. There is both adjustment to the cable length here, and on this particular bike, down inside this cover is adjustment to the actuator or the release, and in reference to the push rod that runs through to the clutch. Different bikes, different systems, but adjust your clutch. It's something that has to be done once in a while, and this is a good time to do it. Another thing to check is fluid levels. Engine oil, engine coolant, and brake and clutch fluid. And don't forget you got brake fluid here in the back of the bike too. I will add here that brake and clutch fluid should be changed periodically, perhaps every 2 years is kind of a good rough measure. I have done it on, well, both of my bikes. The vintage bike does have brake fluid on the front brake. And then this V-Strom has been done within, it's about 1.5 years or so. So I'm not going to run through that, but I wanted to mention that it's another thing you could or should be doing if you haven't done it to your bike in a while. Why? Because brake fluid is hygroscopic and absorbs moisture over time. And as it absorbs moisture, it will lose its high boiling point. And if you're using your brakes a lot, they're going to heat up and you could vaporize the moisture in your brake fluid and lose your brake pressure. So brake fluid needs to be flushed and changed once in a while. I did a video on how to do it on the V-Strom, and that pretty much carries to any modern bike. I'll put a link here. One last fluid level I will mention that doesn't apply to me because I have AGM batteries in both of my bikes now. But if you have a wet cell lead acid battery in your bike, check the fluid level. Add distilled or reverse osmosis water to get it in between this range in all 6 of the cells. And speaking of batteries, it brings me to one of the most important things you should be doing while your bike is sitting idle, and that is put your battery on a tender. Otherwise it will slowly discharge and will not treat you well later when you want to ride. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. This thing is super cheap, works great. And now for what I believe is the most important of this list, For those of you who have a normally aspirated, carbureted, non-pressurized fuel system like I have in the modern V-Strom bike, if you have a vintage bike or anything with a carburetor and you have ethanol blend fuel in that motorcycle, it does not take long for that fuel to start breaking down and absorbing moisture from the atmosphere. We've got a lot of rain here, and so 2 weeks is about the most I ever go without doing something about the fuel in this tank. And I've been off the road for a week or so. I know I'm probably going to be off the road for another couple of weeks the way things are looking. So I'm going to put some fuel stabilizer into this tank. It is better to mix this in outside of the tank, but if you have to do it this way, you can. I put it in the tank. And then slosh it around a while and get it mixed in. Now, is this the only place where fuel is stored on this motorcycle? No. There's a lot of fuel down here in the bowls of these 4 carburetors. That is not stabilized right now, and that is just as susceptible to, well, becoming destabilized, let's say, because there is a vent on these carbs. There is atmospheric pressure, so there is air exposed to the gasoline. This is not sealed up like you think. There has to be atmospheric pressure to allow this to flow properly. And thus, we need to do something about getting some of that stabilized fuel into these carbs. You can either drain a bunch out, which will draw more down, but in this particular case, this bike has a vacuum petcock, and flow is not coming from the tank down into the carburetors unless the engine is running. So what I'm going to do is start the bike up and let it run a while and draw that fuel down into those carburetors. Stabilized fuel down into the carburetors, but also with an old vintage bike like this, and really just about any bike, I mean, if you have a stainless steel exhaust, then this doesn't really matter so much. This does not. This is not a stainless steel exhaust, as many vintage bikes are, and if I run the engine, what I'm doing is pumping air through that engine, and that air has moisture in it. And like an air compressor or any pump, that moisture goes through the engine into the cold exhaust where it condenses on the surfaces, the cold surfaces of that exhaust, and puddles up into water. And if I run the engine for a short period of time and I don't heat up the entire exhaust system, then I'm going to have standing water inside the low points of my exhaust, and over time that's going to rust it away. It's probably the number one reason why old bikes have rusted out exhaust systems, is that people rode them short rides or even just ran them and didn't ride them at all. So if you're going to start a vintage bike, the point here is let that exhaust system completely warm up. I'm going to put a fan on the motor to protect that from overheating and get some airflow over it while I'm heating up that exhaust. So there you have it. There's 10 things you can do during this COVID-19 lockdown to make your bikes happy or your bike. And when the day comes and we can get back out again, they will be ready to go and in great shape. Hey, if you like what I'm doing, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to be